I want to welcome you to the first in a series of events kicking off this year's UCSB Reads. Thank you for joining us today to hear UCSB Art Professor and photographer Richard Ross present Juvenile-in-Justice. For the last 8 years, Richard has accessed youth detention facilities to take photos and hear the stories of incarcerated young people. Richard's photos have been published in the New York Times, Time, and Newsweek. He has been featured on PBS and National Public Radio and received grants from the National Endowment for the Arts, the MacArthur Foundation, and the Guggenheim Fellowship. Images from his 2012 book, Juvenile-in-Justice, have received many awards and media attention and were presented to the U.S. Senate during discussions about youth in the criminal justice system. This month, he released Girls in Justice, focused on young women in the juvenile justice system, with a foreword by Marian Wright Edelman. Images from his book, along with the girls' stories, are on display in the Library Towers Gallery on the first floor. The library is honored to highlight Richard's nationally acclaimed photographs for the first time on campus as part of this year's Reads. Now in its 9th year, the award-winning UCSB Reads program, sponsored by this library, brings the campus and Santa Barbara community together for a common reading experience. This year's book, Orange is the New Black, My Year in a Women's Prison, best-selling memoir by Piper Kerman, that's also the inspiration for the Emmy Award-winning Netflix series. How many of you are aware of that series? I just wondered. Okay. Richard is a UCSB professor since 1977, and he is integrating Orange is the New Black into his spring course, Art 120, Justice. I urge students interested in the issues raised by this book and by the photographs that Richard has provided to look into that course. UCSB Reads continues with more events through April, culminating in an author talk by Piper Kerman. For more information, please visit our website. We're excited that we'll have more space for events and exhibitions that celebrate the richness of scholarship and creativity on our campus when the library's new addition and renovation opens in October. So for now, please join me in welcoming Richard.
I'm going to do this without a mic, if it should be, I hope, okay for you. I think it should be subtitled, Old is the New Orange. Since 1977, and I'm still here. And I want to thank Denise and Alex and everybody at the library for giving me this opportunity. And my son, who's now 34 and teaching middle school in Minneapolis, got the Davidson scholarship through when he graduated high school to go to Berkeley. So I'm very grateful to the Davidson Library for this. This is to introduce it. I do a lot of work in social media as well to get people aware of who these kids are. So my absolute bliss is when I'm sitting on the floor of a cell in some remote space listening to kids tell their stories. And rather than sitting home and watching, binge watching Netflix, I'll sit there and make cookies for kids or go down to Unit J, which is my favorite at LA Central. But I didn't start from nowhere, and I just wanted to give you an idea that when I came here in '77, I knew how to make beautiful pictures. Can we see the screen okay? Are you okay with that? And I worked in museums, I worked in different sites of culture. I worked for the Getty Conservation Institute, for the Getty Museum. I worked for anybody and everybody. But I knew how to make a beautiful photograph and basically suck you into my world. But I studied political science. I went to school at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. I speak now at a lot of law schools, journalism schools, and almost the last place that I talk is art schools. So I've circled around and gone back to my roots. I did this book, Architecture of Authority. This is Montessori school over, it used to be right behind La Cumbra. And my kids used to sit on this circle at Gold Door with the illusion that everybody was equal, the teacher and the kids. Right now, I don't like to use a podium because I think that's really a defensive weapon, and I like to roam around a little bit. So I try to not have a locus of power, but I'm used to seeing things in terms of how's the situation set up. This is the United Nations, where all nations are equal except the Security Council, where some nations are more equal than other nations. A little contradictory. I think this is Ellison Hall. So I use this to say that when I'm up here, you've ceded power to me and you're listening to me for the next 45 minutes. Rather than having a discussion, it's a talk, it's a monologue. Forgive me for that. If you want to interrupt me at any point, jump in. This is Abu Ghraib. So a lot of the work took me to different places all over the world. This was one of the more extreme, where I had to convince my wife, who teaches in the writing program, Sissy Ross, that I was sane. And she did say to me, you go here, you're not coming home to this marriage. Let me make that clear. So not only getting to these places is difficult, but convincing everybody along the way to buy into it is a Herculean task. But literally, when I'm sitting there with my wife and kids at a kitchen table, explaining the morality of what I had to do and why I had to do it, was a pretty difficult one. But I come from a background of doing a lot of editorial work. I would describe myself as a photographic whore. Anybody would call me up and ask me to do something, I would say, sure, what's the price? And I would get paid to go anywhere on the planet, do everything possible that was interesting, and then learn a lot about it, taking a lot of notes, and try to expose myself to different cultures as if I'm a stranger. And it all works in well, and I'm going to get you to where I'm coming today pretty simply, where I found this quote by Booker T. Washington: "The study of art that does not result in making the strong less willing to oppress the weak means little." I don't disrespect Jane Callister, who's a painter, Jane Mulfinger, who's a sculptor, Kip Fulbeck, who does other work, all my colleagues, I love them all. But the work that I'm doing is really compelling to me and satisfies something really important to me. And it's more about what Booker T. Washington says than about the contemporary art critics today. But it all started from doing work like this, which is my daughter. I photographed her every day before she went to high school. The project was called the Lila Project, or 722 Days of High School Hell. This was Santa Barbara High School. And she kept a journal as to what she was doing, and we did this, collaborated on this project, and I talked to a teenager every day for 2 minutes before she went to school, 0 period classes. She ended up going to UCSB and graduating here, and now lives in Santa Barbara and is my best friend. But I'm not a judge, I'm not a probation officer, I'm an artist, I'm a human being. That gives me a lot of credentials in what I do, and I don't want to dismiss that. And I decided with my work I'm going to use art as a weapon. I'm going to change the future. And the question of how to change it, I was wondering, can art be sufficiently dangerous, which is a Leon Golub term. Leon Golub said, when you work in the third world, art is censored a lot because it's sufficiently dangerous to cause trouble for a government. He said in America, that's not the case. Art isn't that. Nobody gives a shit about art. It's stuff in the galleries, it's stuff, maybe, the poster of Obama might have had a little impact, but really art is something that doesn't interact in the social or political system. And my goal is to be sufficiently dangerous, and my goal is to change the system a bit. And by doing that, I'll do things by showing an image of El Paso Juvenile Detention Center and Guantanamo. So this holds the worst terrorists in the world. This holds teenagers as young as 10, not teenagers, a 10-year-old. What's the difference between the two?
Window.
Who has the window? The terrorist, not the kid. So it's the same architecture, and I'm trained as an architectural photographer. So why are we doing this? And I start presenting images like this to state and federal authorities, books, and I start disseminating it in a different world than is normally the gallery world, and I start creating a bit of a buzz, truthfully. But I have a really short amount of time to talk. I'm not going to bore you all afternoon. But there are so many different things that go on with kids. And at least every one of these can be addressed in a quarter's worth of work or more, a master's thesis, a PhD dissertation. But and a lot of them have multiple interactions with each kid. I'll let a kid in St. Louis describe to you his situation and hope that we get sound okay, because it may not be perfect, but let's see if this works.
I got shot. It was on the 22nd of April. Well, they shattered my thumb, because it went in my thumb and kind of went pink, and hopefully they took a piece of bone out of my hip, and they put it in my thumb, just like yesterday, 2 days ago. It's all great. It's all going great. I'm still alive, so I'm good.
I asked him, are you talking ironically? And he said, I don't know what the word ironically means. And I had to explain that one to him. But here's a kid that's been shot, his thumb has been shattered, his right hand has been shattered, and he says, it's all going good, man. That talks about the lack of development of the teenage brain, talks about the prevalence of violence in this culture, the availability of guns. I said, how much does a gun cost? And he said, $50. I said, is that with ammunition? He said, if you don't get a full clip with a .22 for $50, dude, you've been played. So he's being held in isolation. I mean, every possible thing that you can imagine. Poverty interacts with this kid. I've given the images to people like Brian Stevenson at the Equal Justice Initiative. He uses images to present to the Supreme Court as part of his briefs. And Miller versus Alabama, Graham versus Florida, these are Supreme Court rulings that occurred about 2.5 years ago that prevented kids from getting mandatory life sentences without parole. This is a kid that had a mandatory life sentence without parole. So he now has the opportunity after some period of time to be released. He'll get a look back. But some of the states, and I'm photographing now, in Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Michigan, and Louisiana, will not do that look back to people that are already incarcerated. They said moving forward we'll do that, but the people that are incarcerated, no. So now I'm also photographing people in San Quentin, women in Chowchilla, who are 50, 60, in their 70s that have been sentenced when they were teenagers at 15. Yeah, horrendous crimes. But this happened when Eisenhower was president in his first term. At what point do you just say, you've done enough? But then how do you release somebody that's been institutionalized? A million questions, I don't have the answers. So my goal is to give the visual tools to advocates. I've got a great economic system. I do all this work free, and I give it away to people to work as nonprofits to advocate for better outcomes for these kids. I go broke really quickly. The last time I sold one of the photographs that you see downstairs hasn't happened. Nobody wants these, but they're used a lot. And it's ubiquitous within advocates of the justice system that if they want images of kids incarcerated, they come to me and they get them, period. So financially, it's ruinous, but emotionally and morally, I'm on cloud 9. It's great. I want to change the current practice for these kids. And often we get calls to my studio, which is over in the art department, with mothers saying, my kid's out of control, I want to take him to detention, where do I put him? And then we give them the resources in their neighborhood or community to say, don't do that. As soon as you do that, it's a disaster for the kid. There are resources in your community, here's how to do that. And we intervene there. And also I want to frame the issues for the next generation, which would be you. How to find an issue, not necessarily this that you care about, and feel like you're not going to be totally impotent, but you can actually make a change. All these institutions are dangerous, ineffective, unnecessary, wasteful, obsolete, and inadequate. I can't put each individual adjective on each image, but I can show you things like this, which is truly a horrendous situation. This is Orleans Parish Prison. This is Sheriff Guzman. He collects kids from other parishes in Louisiana, rents out space in Orleans Parish to these other parishes to house these young men of color in his cells and makes a profit. So they're all 22 young black men that are under-supervised. There was a gang fight the night before in this space, so they took away the TV, no books, no cards, no dominoes, and it's August, New Orleans, and there's no air conditioning. What do you want? Are you torturing these kids or what? Which he is, and he's doing it for a profit, period. This is Kansas, where this kid was direct filed. The judge said, you're not doing your homework. You're going to go here for 2 weeks and spend some time in detention. And he's 12 years old, and there were 4 other kids in the adjoining cells that were being held on charges of armed bank robbery that were 17 years old. So what's the outcome for this kid? What's he going to learn? More than book learning, he's going to learn thug life pretty quickly. This is Santa Barbara High. I don't know if any of you went to Santa Barbara High. This is their detention, after school detention. If you've done something wrong in class or they just hold you, that's where you go. Your first experience with discipline. A lot of, and I'm going to jump around a little bit, but a lot of what occurs with, I don't know how old you are, probably, let's say you're 20, let's say your average age is 20. If you do things and you're under 21, it could be a status offense. If you're under 18, different status offenses. If you run away from home, it could be a status offense. You're not allowed to do that if you're under 18. You have to be under parental control. Even if you stay couch surfing at a friend's house because you're pissed off at your mother, which we always had kids sleeping in a spare bedroom at my house. We were the safety valve for some kids. And my kids slept over at other friends' houses when something went wrong at our house. But that's a status offense. None of you ever smoked weed. I know that. But it comes down heavier on you if you're in King County, California, if you're in certain parts of the country. San Francisco, Isla Vista, you can smoke as much weed as you want, as long as you don't go up to a cop and blow it in his face and be totally disrespectful. And you just make choices about law enforcement. The 120 class in the spring, we're going to get Cam Sanchez, Bill Brown, the sheriff, and Dustin Olson, the chief of police of the university, are all coming to the class to speak. So we're going to be talking about law enforcement. It's going to be an interesting class, not just photography. This is a 5th grader, got in a fight with another kid in Washoe County. The teacher, I hate to say it, my day, you get in a fight with another kid, the teacher says, you there, stop it. And it was pretty much over. Now there are so many police in the school and there's certain protocol that a kid pushing another kid getting in a fight, and then the kid went to the principal's office and stole a muffin off the principal's desk because he was hungry while he was waiting. So the police took him to the detention center. It's 10:30 in the morning. They took his shoes, took his belt, because that's the protocol as a suicide risk when you first go in. But I said to him, this isn't a gangbanger. I said to him, your mommy's going to come soon, don't worry. And the detention center head who let me in there said, can we use your photograph? I said, sure. She sent it out to all the principals in her district and said, this is not the place for kids. Solve the problem in your classroom. Solve the problem in your office. Do not engage the police to bring this kid here, because the kid has to wait till 6:30 because his mother is working, a single parent, and would lose her job, and the other siblings and the rest of the family would suffer if she stopped and tried to get him out of jail. But you have a kid that's in a detention center, you obviously want to go immediately. So sometimes you have to change the protocols. Institutions are hoarders of bad practices. So they do certain things because they're told that this is the practice they do. And you have to change them and have them revisit them, reevaluate them, and you have to get everybody to buy into it. 1980s, 1990s, there was some sort of a very bad academic study that said, super predators are here. Teenagers going crazy, they're going totally nuts, and it led to a culture where we build a lot built a lot of mass incarceration, especially for kids. Why can we do it for kids? Because you can bully kids. If you bully somebody that is a person of color, you might get some pushback. You might be sued. Kids can't sue anybody. They have no rights. So it's real easy to bully kids. Great buzzword these days. We don't want our kids being bullied. As a society, we bully kids. It's a pretty broad comment, but I'm willing to back it up as much as you want. The media sells this pretty easily. You could look at newspapers, magazines, Fox TV, real easy to sell this. You'd never sell something like this. You are the most law-abiding generation in the history of data collection. That is the truth. You're totally safe. You're safe as milk. You're great kids. Walk on any side of the street at any hour, you're going to be fine. You're not. Everything that the media tries to sell you about violent kids is not true. We've been closing down a lot of these mass incarceration institutes, especially for kids. We've been turned a corner and reduced it, and crime hasn't gone up. They're not quite sure why, but the data proves that the more you release kids and give resources to the community, the better the outcomes for kids and communities remain safe. And the language that we use. So some of you that are writers writing for the Nexus, where's my friend that's writing for the Nexus? Using the word juvenile elicits a 4-to-1 negative response. If you use words like youth, it becomes positive, kid, more positive, child. Everybody loves children. But juvenile, as soon as somebody says juvenile, you're throwing up your lip and saying, oh, he's acting so juvenile. Sneer. Chicago police, we serve and protect. So the first verb is we serve. LA police, we protect and serve. Protect, I would suggest, is a more aggressive verb. So they're wearing more SWAT uniforms, and Chicago is a more, has a reputation of being a harder city than Chicago in terms of dealing, especially with minority populations. What does it say on the side of UCSB, please? It says, your department, our community. Little buzzwords, but it frames the way you interact with the public. So take a look around the country, and that's part of what we have to start thinking about. I started working with girls who are unique, and it used to be that girls would run away because they're in abusive families, abusive situations. They would run away and then they would be prostituting, bad word. So then we started using the word sex-trafficked youth. It has a very political, good sound to it. I don't even like that. I like the fact that these kids are victims. They run away because they've been abused, and you have to find a really different terminology to think of the mitigating circumstances that these kids are under. This is Houston, and this is an 11-year-old. And the ceiling here, instead of being, this is probably 10 feet tall, the ceiling in her cell is about 7 feet tall. And all the furniture is like mobile home furniture. It's all really tiny. You know what a joy Hawaii is. Hawaii's paradise on earth. It's the worst. This is Oahu. This is the main detention center there. They were under a federal indictment to change, so they built a new facility. And they said, the court administrator said, can you come to Oahu and document, we built a new facility and I'm afraid we've got a problem because the architecture and the way we built it, we're stuck with it for the next 50 years and it will inform our practice. So they built, this is their new facility that they built because they had to get rid of the old facility. This is horrible. But it's based on Pelican Bay, which is maximum security for adults in California. So why would you do that? Why would you build a facility that costs $130 million to hold 55 kids that are pre-adjudicated? They haven't been found guilty of anything. They've just been picked up, usually for POA, which is pissing off an adult. So, you know, they got attitude. They're trying to push back a little bit. They piss off a cop. They say, I'm taking you in. And they put him in here. They haven't seen a judge yet. And it's based on maximum security for the worst of the worst in California. Makes no sense. when you can predict that an infant boy of color in a particular zip code is more likely to go to prison than to college, it's our fault more than his. And you can do that. 95% of the kids in prison or detention in Pennsylvania are from 2 zip codes. That's it. But you know the outcome for the kids. They tore down 3 schools in the Kensington area of Philadelphia, and they put up a brand new detention center. So the kids in the neighborhood say, that building, that's where I'm going to school. That is my school. This is LA. This is Ronald Franklin, and I can give you his name and show you his face. He was held when I had permission from the defense attorney, from his mother, from Ronald. He's now 18. He gets released in April. I think he'll be 20. Pretty sure he'll be 20. I visited him about 3 times in Florida, and his mother and his house. When he was 13, his mother was a crack addict for 30 years. She tried to murder him. He ran away from home. Police were called. Charges were filed. He ran away from home. He joined a gang. Within a month, the gang of 5 kids had carjacked and gang raped somebody. Not light charges. But he was the youngest. They flipped the gun to him. And the other 4 kids, the co-defendants, all were copped out, and they pointed to him as the youngest. There were 3 different states' attorneys. Long story short, he was held for 4.5 years without a trial. Then finally, the judge moved him back to juvenile court as opposed to adult court, and he will be released in April, I think April 21st. But they wouldn't allow any mitigating factors of his upbringing. They don't do that in Florida. And this is where he's held. Now he's held in Okeechobee, Florida, which is the speckled perch capital of the world. And it's a town of 55,000 people, of which 35,000 are incarcerated. And it's about 2 hours north of Miami. I had everything arranged to go visit there. I got there, and they wouldn't let me in. And they said, no, this is a private facility. We don't care. You're not on his list. You're not getting in. And I basically flew there to see the guy. And it's run by G4S, which is a private security company, one of the largest in the world, that provides security for the State Department, for countries like Sudan, and security for nuclear facilities all over the world. I mean, they're paramilitary, and they're all ex-military or special forces that run places for kids. This is the architecture of LA Central and East Lake, in case you're interested. This is what these places look like. This is Alameda. It's a LEED certified building. It costs $155 million to build. It costs $249,000 to hold a kid in there each year. It's $250,000. You go outside the facility into Oakland, and they're spending $4,900 a year for each kid in the classroom. I think between state and the city, they're spending a total of about $8,700 for the kid. But there's the priority. Spend $250,000 to hold a kid in jail, as opposed to spending a nominal amount to try and educate them. It don't make sense. And these are kids that are being held under 24-hour supervision. So this kid has been held for almost 2 years, and he's level 3, which means that he has to have 24-hour supervision. Imagine being a teenager and having somebody watch you for 24 hours a day. And then the person that's watching them, the jailers become the jailed. I mean, and they're sitting there just checking their phone all the time, saying hello to friends, texting. This is Colorado, and they closed this institution. It's a boot camp. And boot camps have been closing around the country, which is a good thing, because these kids come from very traumatic backgrounds, and it's not effective to shout at them and have them respond to you, sir, yes, sir. This is Maryvale, which is down in Monterey Park. I asked the director, what percentage of the girls have been sexually abused when they come here? He said, what percentage? Every one of them. All 88 girls in our custody have been sexually abused. And then he said, and most of the boys. They're all victims of abuse. And when they run away, they are status offenders, then they're brought back into custody, and then they're put in detention, and they run away from detention, then they become criminalized. Rather than being helped, rather than somebody that abused them being prosecuted.
The first time I was sexually abused was at the age of probably around 5. They were with my mother, and I tried to tell her a few times, and she said I didn't know what I was talking about, I was too little. And when I finally the time when I actually finally gave up on trying to get to talk to her about it was when one of her boyfriends, after having raped me, left the room and slammed the door so hard that it didn't actually close, it kind of like swung back open. And I saw her sitting on the couch across from the doorway. And she looked at me and smiled, and I knew the whole time that she could hear me screaming.
These are the stories of these kids. It's in their own words. This girl has "fuck love" tattooed on her hand. It's not really aggressive. It's just saying that I come from a background where parents don't parent, caregivers don't care, the people that are responsible for me are irresponsible, and the only way I can protect myself is by taking care of myself, and I'll do whatever's necessary to do that. Fuck love. And this is a very common tattoo amongst girls in the system. Young mothers with ankle bracelets, multi-generational. And we do bully kids. In California, juveniles spend more time in confinement than adults for the same crime, 11 months longer. If an adult steals a car, a kid will spend 11 months longer in confinement. If an adult steals something, ditto. I don't know how that works. We can bully kids. That's what happens. These are graphs that are presented by my great friends in the Annie Casey Foundation and sociology and all sorts of different social sciences. I don't understand them. I've been a university professor since '77. I don't get this. So my goal is to make things very simple so people can have takeaways that are better for them to. I don't question the data, it's necessary, but it's too much for the world of Instagram, for the world of Twitter. These are simpler. The incarceration rates among founding NATO members. This is the United States. This is everybody else. We're off the chart. We've developed this culture that is horrific. This is Jerry Brown, our governor, using a very poor visual aid. So my goal is to make better visual aids. Somebody needs to help Jerry Brown. And I look at things like Muhammad Ali, Dorothea Lange. This is actually shot in Napomo, just up the road. Nick Ut did this in Vietnam. And then I think, what's the seminal image for your generation that's visual? The World Trade Center? Miley Cyrus twerking? What's the common visual vocabulary that if somebody says a picture, you think about? I want to create that. I want to have images that haunt you, that when you think of kids in the system, you have them looking back at you and saying, don't forget me. That's my goal. And have small pieces of information. Children as young as 7 can be prosecuted and tried in adult court in 22 states in the District of Columbia. 7 years old, tried as adults. And it happens, not as young as 7 anymore, but you can get really a lot of politicians demanding adult sentences for very young children. And I want to show you how young these kids are, that these are little kids. This is a girl that was doing 35 years. She murdered somebody. She was high on meth. Her mother gave her meth when she was 7. The mother has since born again, gotten out of the life of drugs, and is free as a bird. Her daughter is suffering the consequences of her poor decisions when she was young. This girl has already served about 10 years. I think she's 23, 24, something like that. She was sentenced at 14, and is going to serve until she's 34. How does that work? Parens patriae, the parent of the nation. This is what happens when you see a kid in a closet. What are you going to do? What do you do? Let him out. The state is supposed to act as the parent when the parent can't. But these are the closets that we put kids in. These are isolation rooms that we put kids in, and they're under the guise of administrative segregation, timeout rooms, desensitization rooms. And I have a library of these all over the country that kids are put in. We only put them in there for 10 minutes. We only put them in there for 23 hours, and then we let them out for an hour. We don't keep them in there. Santa Barbara, I interviewed a kid that was in there 3 weeks. Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara's nice and happy and friendly. Not so. But I really need the volume to make sure you understand that it's not an anomaly. It's not just one place. This is Miami. The window's covered. The kid has no mattress, no blanket, no pillow. You put a kid, I think this is Washington State, you put a kid in here and you put them in the room, you lock the door, and then you throw these 4 deadbolts. You're not talking about Hannibal Lecter and Silence of the Lambs. You're talking about a kid, a child, and you're putting them in a room like this. What goes through their mind as those deadbolts are closing behind them? It has to be destructive. Even worse, if they start responding to this trauma and they go out of control in these rooms, they put them in equipment like this and like this. These aren't historical. These aren't Game of Thrones medieval torture. This is being used today in a girls' institution in Oregon. How do you do that to a kid? This is Torrance, California, where kids are put in straitjackets and then they're bolted to this bed. And the director said, we've changed our practice. We haven't used this in over a year, which means 2014 they were using it. And there's nothing that's going to stop them from using it tomorrow if they decide that a kid really needs it. It's tough for kids. It's even tougher for kids that are gay, and it's horrendous for kids that are transgender. So this is a kid where the director said, yeah, this is a transgender male to female. Often they're thrown out of their family and have to respond to survival sex, to eat, to sleep, to live. And the director said, if I put her in with the girls, she'll be hurt. If I put her in with the boys, she'll be killed. I keep her in isolation. I know it's against federal law. I know that. But she's not going to be killed on my watch. There's no alternatives for the director of this, and these kids suffer tremendously. The proportion of transgender kids that are in these situations or in trouble with the law is astronomical. And then I take the kids' stories and I try to make them first person and put them in as close to the image as possible. It's pretty difficult being gay and Christian in a land of homophobes. Actually, it's pretty impossible here. I change the initials, I alter or change the faces as much as possible. It's even more difficult for kids that are Native American, because there's double jeopardy involved if something happens on reservation or tribal land as opposed to state land. And the whole world that I studied of political science turns upside down when I used to think I understood something, but I really didn't understand the difference between federal and state government, and then each Indian nation is a nation. It has its own rules, its own laws. But then if a crime occurs, depending on who's the perpetrator, who's the victim, what the crime is, on tribal land, they could be charged state or federal. Most of the kids that are tribal that are convicted of crimes end up in federal institutions. And they're moved to places like DC or federal land. 75% of runaways are female, and running away is disproportionately a trigger for girls' involvement in the system. This is a girl who, and it's in the book, and I'm not going to read from a PowerPoint, but one time my mom put us in a dog cage and poured water on us. Another time my dad, a vet, put us in military duffel bags and left us in a basement for days. Department of Health and DHS took me into custody at 13. I was in every placement, foster homes, group home shelters, RTCs. I always ran away. These are kids that need help. And they're crossovers. These are duals. They go from the dependency system to detention and back and forth. What we've done is we've criminalized normal adolescent misbehavior. Did you ever do anything that was misbehaving when you were a kid? Yes. Was it criminal? Did you shop? I shoplifted. I smoked dope. I don't even want to tell you the list of things that I got away with that I could have been I don't want to go into that one. But I'm white, middle class, and had the backing of my family, my neighborhood, my community. These kids don't. They're all kids of color. And when I say all, I'm speaking in hyperbole, but it's not that far from the truth. You see in the display case downstairs these shackles, and they're heavy, and they just make kids wear them all the time. Every single child 13 and 14 years old sentenced to life without parole for a non-homicide has been a person of color. Every kid. Do we discriminate? Yeah, maybe we do. I think we do. And
I can't lay down, I gotta sit up. I can lay down at 7:30. They wake me up at 6 o'clock. And then if they see us laying down or falling asleep, then they take our mattress and covers. And my back really hurts.
an institution of 50 girls, 49 of them are white. One girl is African American. One girl is held in isolation, and the detention center heads said she was intimidating the other girls. And I have to say to him, wait a minute, you have one girl of color here, one black girl, and she's intimidating 49 white girls? And I couldn't go crazy. What I did was I bought him a bottle of really good scotch that was made in the state where he is from. And I sent it to him and I said, I'll be back to visit. And I went back and visited, and I basically had a scotch with him after I visited these girls again, and I just tried to engage him on a different level. And just said, how did that one make sense? Why do you take away her mattress and her blanket and her pillow and not let her lie down during the day? Why is she held for 72 hours in confinement and you don't find another treatment for these kids? You have to figure out how to engage. You can't just come from a holier-than-thou posture and tell them what they're doing wrong.
Richard, did he have an answer for you?
Policy. Institutions are hoarders of bad policy. But he was willing to investigate it. There was one detention center head in Kansas who wanted to get his staff to take off their SWAT uniforms. And he's now a friend of mine at this point. He used to run a male a prison in Leavenworth. And he said, I couldn't get my COs to take off their SWAT uniforms. They wouldn't do it. And what he did was he ordered Hawaiian pizza on Fridays. And a lot of these guys are big. And he said, you can have free Hawaiian pizza on Friday if you wear a Hawaiian shirt on Friday. There's more than one way to skin a cat. And then they realized that the kids didn't respect them because they were wearing Hawaiian shirts. And the place didn't go crazy. And the corrections officers felt it was okay. And when he introduced the idea of taking off SWAT uniforms and got them polo shirts and khakis, it was introduced, you have to get everybody to buy in. It's a tough one. You can't legislate it down to these people. You have to convince them. And a lot of the corrections officers are returning Middle Eastern vets. So we don't have a high unemployment for veterans because a lot of them work for TSA or prisons. Solves a problem, a political problem. Latino youth are 4 times more likely to receive an adult sentence for the same crime as white children. African American youth are 9 times more likely. This goes on in our country. We spend $88,000 a year on average around the country for kids in detention per year. The state of Florida spends $1.54 per day for kids to eat. So do the math. Maybe they're spending $500 a year to feed a kid. $88,000, there's 87.5 that's not accounted for. Somebody's making money, and it's places that are housing kids and adults. These are constant pat downs just to dehumanize kids. This is Pennsylvania, 4 guys talking down at a kid in distress. This is Santa Barbara, and this is Washington State, where the officers, all they do is they go laterally. They just go like this and say, what's going on here? You know, tell me. And you talk to a kid on their own level. Obama uses that tool all the time. You know, and there was a picture with Hurricane Sandy of he and Christie together were approaching people that were victims of the hurricane. Christie's standing there talking down to them. Obama's there crouching and just saying, how can we help? What can we bring in? A very good political move. This is St. Louis, where the judge in St. Louis bought a school for $1 and got volunteer teachers. And rather than having a zero tolerance policy and kicking kids out of school, he sent them to this school where they were able to work with abandoned dogs, learn chess. And this was probably the worst orchestra I've ever heard in my life. But they were sincere in trying, and they were doing something, and they weren't home watching TV or getting into too much trouble. Massachusetts, they didn't have the money to build an isolation cell, so they had a CVS pharmacy chair. It cost $7.99, and they put construction paper over the chair and said, look, you're not doing good. Go over there, settle down. When you're ready to join the group, come back. Cheaper, much more effective, much more humane. It works. We're a little out of our aspect. Kids in this world are often defined by the actions of the worst day of their lives. Contrast this to the picture of your parents describing your accomplishments. So this is binary. Your mother or father called up somebody and said, Jared got into UCSB. And somebody said, great. Whereas these kids, somebody said, Kelly got picked up for shoplifting. She's in detention. It's a binary thing. And it's almost like you get cultured into expecting these results. I do other work at the same time I'm doing this to try and stay sane. I did a project in Indianapolis, and I went to the Indiana State Fair. These are Indiana Fair queens that you know the outcome for these girls. They are white, they are female, they're from the Midwest, and this is Miami-Dade graduation wall from their detention center. And before kids are released and put on probation, they show them this and say, these are the graduates from this institution. And there were over 50 images that were kids within 3 years from when I shot this that were killed on the streets from gunshot wounds. And this is Miami, which is a brutal city. So depending on the accident of the uterus that ushered you forth, depending on your gender and your color, your outcome is predetermined. Your mortality is predetermined. These are kids that are killed within 2 or 3 years of being released. How do we sleep as a society and let this happen? So I did this. I created a website, a blog. I'm not necessarily the most native person to the digital age, but shit, I'm going to get there. I did all this work pretty much in secret. I didn't tell anybody except my wife and kids what I was doing. And I would go to each detention center and explain. Each one would take 50 phone calls, 50 emails. I'm a professor, I'm a reporter, I'm a photographer. I work for Harper's. And I just said, I want to interview some of the kids. No identities will be compromised. And they never understood the context of putting it all together. Never. So Rick MacArthur, he's the publisher of Harper, said, I'll give you all the space you want, I'll let you write whatever you want, and we'll pay you. But the kid that is in the image we want to lead with can't wait anymore. You've been to over 30 states. You don't have to be a Winnebago with badges from every state in the country. you have to start having this discussed. And it was published in October of 2012, I think. And it exploded. NPR, PBS. The timing was right for people to really pay attention to it. And it started Europe, Germany. Everybody was interested in these kids. Dick Durbin used the images in congressional hearings to prevent kids from being in isolation. The House used it. Everybody was using them. Nobody would publish the book that I wanted to publish. I'd done 10 other books. Books on social justice don't make money. And it's one of these things, yes, I've been here since '77. My kids are grown. Okay, I know how to publish a book. Spoke to my designer and said, we're doing it ourselves. And I printed I convinced Ira Glass, who's always very active in kids and justice. And I said, you have to do this. And I explained why. And then I was editing Ira Glass, who's one of my heroes, saying, I'm cutting this out, cutting this out. But between him and Bart Lubau, who's the head of the Annie Casey Foundation, within 6 months, we sold out of the first edition. And it went to the right people. And I was able to send it to every member of the Supreme Court, the Congressional Black Caucus, and people that really needed to see this as an important issue. I created an exhibition, which is very accessible to university museums. It's a cheap show. You just put it up with pushpins. It's not commodified to allow a discussion between black studies, sociology, art, law, journalism, and just create it as the nexus for a discussion for these kids. This is an entire show in a box, which I can't tell you how unusual this is when other exhibitions I've done have been matted, framed, crated, and basically costs about $40,000 to go from one stop to the next. In Philadelphia, we did something where we had a show there, and then we got all the lawyers in the community to help kids in the community expunge their records. So at the show, 250 kids had their juvenile records expunged, which made a tremendous difference in their lives. And I would do things like, I decided I would see what it was like to go and be what these kids are doing. I went into isolation for 24 hours. Or I went into an institution and said, okay, fingerprint, mug, do everything that you want to do. And I did exactly what a kid would be, but I knew I could get out of there at any time. A kid doesn't. And I stayed here for 24 hours and did a little QuickTime movie of it. And it got picked up by Wired and some other people. It was pretty interesting. I started photographing. This is a girl in dependency. This is a girl who's in joint custody. 3/4 of the girl in detention are suffering from one or more mental health disorders, and they get no help. This is a girl that was in dependency. The only reason she ran away from a foster home was to see her baby in Las Vegas, who was with the father. And then she's put in, this is in LA Central. And these are young kids. This slide coming up, you can imagine the age of this kid.
I was at school. I got checked out early. And the police is at my house and they took me and my sister.
So he's 6 years old and he's taken into a shelter, but he's taken in a police car. The policeman picked him up, not a policewoman. And these are very fragile kids, and you have to look at all their lives through the lens of trauma. You can't presume that it's going to be that easy for them. This is Starview in LA. My father spent his life abusing alcohol, abusing drugs, and abusing me. This is a kid that's just hiding under the bed. And he's saying, yeah, you don't have to blur my face. You can use my real name. I want people to know who I am. I don't, so I really darken the face and blur the name. And listen to these places.
Take care of yourself. Lifetime skill. Where your homeboy at? Still you know, little man. I didn't say you did, little man. I'm just saying. Okay, step out to the middle of the hallway, John. Take it in there and see them stairs. I'm waiting on my iron on the chair.
Hands behind your back, eyes down, arm's length. Who makes these rules for kids? This coming up is a high school that deals with dependency kids, and this is normal noise. I remember my parents, when they would be afraid I was getting into trouble in my room with somebody or something or whatever, would be going like this and say, make some noise in there. You know, they were always a little nervous when I wasn't making noise. We're almost there. This is a kid in LA Central. He was in there Grand Theft Auto. He's 11 years old for four different times at least. Every time I go there I usually go there on Sundays, and I say, are you still here? No, I'm back. What are you here for? Grand Theft Auto. Why do you steal cars? Can you reach the pedals? Sometimes. When did you learn how to drive? By taking cars. Where do you go? I don't know, I can't read. When do you stop? When the cops pull me over or when I run out of gas? I mean, he was like Camus. He was so existential. And I went to visit his home. This is his room at home. Nice and clean, but there's no stimulation there. The mother is a crossing guard. She has other kids from another family, smokes Newports a lot, just doesn't have the resources to give this kid anything beyond stealing cars. The families don't get the help they need. And then this is a guy who's 57 years old who was charged at 14 in San Quentin. And then I was just up in San Quentin about 3 weeks ago. And then as long as I'm doing everything possible under the sun, this is Mandy, who's real interesting. San Quentin has 4,000 men. It also has mostly ex-military guards, corrections officer. Mandy is pre-op transgender and getting sex affirmation surgery in March, and is going to come to our class in April and talk about the discrimination that she faces as a corrections officer and as a transgender. So I'm going to try and throw as much odds and ends at you as possible. 88% of the kids shown in this brief presentation are being held in these institutions for nonviolent crimes. You could do something different with them. Instead of having the child accountable to society and its institutions, what happens if you turn that equation around? February 23rd, a German judge is coming with 18 students from Germany. He also runs a detention center in Karlsruhe. They let kids out on the weekend. I said, do you do drug testing when they come back in? He said, why? They would just test positive for marijuana, and then what do we do? He's changed the institution rather than the kid and say, I understand the difference between marijuana and other things. I don't want to destroy a kid's life for smoking a reefer on the weekend with his friends. Why do that? I did this book, just came out last Monday. Again, nobody would publish it. Oh, and then I'm doing this coming up, The Parent of Last Resort, Child Protective Services in America. And then this is going to be out next year, Juvie Talk, Unlocking the Language of Lockdown. And I'm creating a play with a director named Peter Sellers, which will be in junior high schools and high schools. And it'll be web-based instruction so that the kids that are impacted by the system at the earliest age will be able to empathize with the kids in the system. And I think that's it. So, man, this format has really horrendous editing. Forgive me, my wife would kill me. Questions? Can we turn the lights on? 55 minutes, I went a little over. Come on, question. You, question. Yeah.
I'm going to have you use this mic. It doesn't amplify, but it works for the video. Thanks.
What is dependency when you say?
Dependency is abuse and neglect kids. Oh. It used to be orphans or kids that were from dangerous situations. The cops go in and they, unfortunately with girls, how many of you girls ever got into an argument with your mother? Okay. Sometimes in some situations, if it's really flammable, it could be classified as domestic violence. Police are called, there's a California law that if there's domestic violence, and it was made for male, female, but you have to take somebody out of the situation to diffuse it. A cop would go in, the mother would point to the daughter would point to the mother. The cop would say, do we take the mother out of the situation and have to deal with finding placement for 4 or 5 siblings? Or do we take the teenage daughter out of the situation? They're incentivized to believe the mother, although the mother may be as credible as the daughter, and the daughter may be as credible as the mother. So then all of a sudden, you have a situation of dependency. If they take the mother out, then they have 4 kids in dependency. If they take the daughter out, and it's often the daughter, then it becomes the daughter goes into dependency, emergency foster care, shelter, something to stabilize the situation. And we have something on campus called guardian scholars, who are kids that come from the foster care system. And there's a state law that gives them free tuition, and it's really hard for them because they don't have the support system of a family, and they don't necessarily have the accountability of a family. So there's about 200 kids on campus that are really worth keeping an eye out and trying to help out a little bit. Yeah?
Do I need the microphone first? Let's make sure we get it on the camera.
Okay.
All right. So are they on to you now after you've been published? Do the directors of the institution say, oh gosh, here he comes, let's not let him in? And do you find some directors that say, excellent, we have an advocate to help change the policy that I have to work for?
Yes. I get both of them. I get more of the former. But I was just in Tuscaloosa, Alabama 10 days ago with an exhibition and a talk at the University of Alabama. I met the detention center head in Alabama. Did you see Selma? Great movie. So this is Tuscaloosa. And she said, oh yeah, come down and visit us and I'll show you the program when we do. We want to take care of our babies of every age. And I'm going down there February 18th and actually meeting Fusion TV down there. They want to do a piece on girls. So I'm going to meet them in Tuscaloosa, then I'm going to Olathe, Kansas, and meet another film crew there. And just trying to get something going. But a lot of places are now hesitant. Although I'm very upfront and say, your institution can come under criticism, but the outcome for these kids will be better long-term, and they'll never be damaged short-term. So if you're in this to help the outcome of your kids being better, then you should invite me in. Won't happen in some places. People are very protective of their institutions. Yeah?
Is there much difference between the way for-profit organisations deal with the juveniles versus the ones that are run by state?
Is there much difference? I'll just repeat the question. Is there a difference between for-profit or state-run organizations? The problem is it's really confused in terms of what's state and what's for-profit, because a lot of state institutions will outsource for food services, for mental health services, for security. You go to Chicago and there's state of Illinois corrections officers at Cook County Detention Center, and there's also Wackenhut guards working next to each other. So some are state, some are private. You can't tell the difference, unless there are cases like G4S, which is all private and contracted out. But there's money involved, so people really take advantage of money and especially use kids to profit from it. Yeah. Ask the question and I'll repeat it.
Oh, okay.
Whatever, Alex.
What can people like me do? Like, just
Great. Go to my website, Juvenile-in-Justice, and there's a portion of what can you do. And primarily what you can do is just figure out the strategy of what you're interested in. It doesn't have to be kids. It's an important issue, but I talk to a broad range of students. I think I spoke to 3,000 high school journalism students and their advisors at the conference you were at. They're all not interested in juvenile justice, but just feeling you can do something. Locally, I would say go to Girls Inc., goes to the Boys and Girls Club, and just don't overcommit yourself. Just say to a kid, I will come here once a month and you can count on me. And I'll help you do your homework and I'll ask what's going on in your life. It's as simple as that. You just start off with that. Just mentoring somebody, bringing them on campus, and saying, this is your institution. You're from the state of California. You can come here. That's it. Twice a week, just get involved. The hardest thing is just overcoming the barrier of saying, my interest, my efforts won't make a difference. I told my wife that this was what I was going to do about 8 years ago. And she said, you're out of your mind. She still thinks I'm out of my mind, but she's still married, and it's still, I've been able to do even more than I anticipated, a lot more. Yeah.
Just from a photographer's point of view, how long did it take your subjects to get comfortable with you? I'm assuming it didn't happen just instantly. Like, how did you work with the subjects?
I've got a really good rap. I'm not a young African American or person of color. I'm so foreign from their world that I'm no threat, especially young black men. I'm nobody to them. I'm no threat. And then I sit on the floor. I did that Architecture of Authority book, and I realized that power comes from above. So I sit on the floor and give the kid power to look down on me and shut the conversation off at any time. And then I talk to them and I take notes, although I record it when I can. I take notes, and I'm very slow at taking notes. And I allow these real long periods of silence. And then I'll go back and just go, really? And then more and more and more. And then after it, I just go, very theatrically, oh, I have a bad back. Can you help me up? And they help me up, and it's almost like an E.T., physical moment that they help me up, and I go, now we have to take a picture without your face showing, and I've done this so much. How do we do this? And they become co-conspirators. I give them my camera, I say, take a picture of me. And then if they allow me, I take a picture of them that I will send to them, to their mother, whatever they want, and give something back. But it's a strategy. It's a little patter that I've got going. And it doesn't always work. Some kids are stressed out and they don't want to talk to you. It's okay. They're having the worst day of their lives if they've just come in there. And I don't want to make it any worse. So it's almost like the physician's creed, first do no harm.
Maybe one more question.
You.
I'm just curious as to at what point in your career as a photographer did you see the need or even just make the kind of pivot to focus more on social issues than whatever work you focused on prior?
I've done social issues all my life. I grew up the son of a New York City cop. We always had every newspaper on the planet. Both my parents didn't graduate high school, and I was their dream come true. I was going to go to college, which I did. I was going to go to law school, made a U-turn on the New Jersey Turnpike and said, can't do that. They were ready to kill me, but it's always was politics and law in my house. Those were the main mantras. And then when I went to art school, basically to avoid the Vietnam War, I had to go to a different graduate program. It was going to be art for some reason. And I made beautiful pictures. I made money making beautiful pictures. So that was the anomaly. And then I was always that political animal. And then as soon as I started doing things like, I did a book called Waiting for the End of the World, Bomb Shelters Around the World. I did Architecture of Authority. I started working for Newsweek, the New York Times, the LA Times, all the major news magazines, and I loved it. On jumping out of helicopters. It was pure gonzo journalism. I couldn't do it anymore at this point in my life, but it was thrilling. And then this has been thrilling as well, slower paced, much more of a, almost the prose, or the poetry rather than the prose. But I've been doing it all my life. Thank you guys. I'm teaching the 120 class in the spring. You want to take it, we can get you in. It's hard work, but it probably will be. I hope it's interesting. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.